Welcome to the Rediscovery channel. This is the channel where every week I, Ivor Kovac, and my good friend Stilgar take turns coming up with topics from history that the other person doesn't know about and probably hasn't heard about. Today, however, I have Mrs. Kovac filling in for Stilgar because Stilgar is sick. So today I'm going to ask Mrs. Kovac, have you ever heard of William Henry Harrison before?
No.
What part of the world do you think he's from?
William,
William
I
Henry
I
Harrison.
guess UK?
No, actually, he's from the United States. So,
Oh, okay.
yeah, William Henry Harrison was the ninth president of the United States, number nine.
Oh.
And he was a member of the Whig Party. And he lived from 1773 to 1841. And he was president from March 4th, 1841 to April 4th, 1841. So he was the first president to die in office, and he served the shortest of all terms that any president has ever served before. So basically, he was there for 1 month and then he died.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Okay. But even though his presidency was very short, he did do some very important things historically, which had some permanent cultural impact. So, anyways, starting at the beginning, he was born in February 9th, 1773, near Richmond, Virginia, at Berkeley Plantation. Not to be confused with Berkeley University. That one's out in California. And of course,
Okay.
back then, California didn't even exist yet. So this
Mm-hmm.
is a place in Virginia called Berkeley.
Okay.
His father was Benjamin Harrison, who was one of the original signers of the Declaration of Independence. And originally, he studied medicine. He went to the University of Pennsylvania to study medicine, but he dropped out in 1791 to join the military. So I guess originally he was going to be a doctor, but instead he went and joined the military. What would you think if one of our sons did that?
I think it's great.
Oh, okay, great. That's a that's a chill reaction. So he served under General Anthony Wayne in the war against the Northwest Indian Confederation. And so you have to remember that back then the United States didn't go all the way from coast to coast. So this is a war with actually the Native Americans. These guys weren't real Indians, not in the sense that you would mean it. Um, and this war ended with the Battle of Fallen Timbers in 1794. The resolution of this war is what opened up Ohio for settlement, because before then this area was controlled by Native Americans. Um, let's see here. So during this war, William Henry Harrison is promoted to captain, and he's given command of Fort Washington near what would later become Cincinnati. So this after the war when he's promoted. My bad. Um, in 1795, he marries Anna Toothill Sims, and they had 10 children.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, but six of them died before he becomes president. So, and actually, I think after he becomes president, one more of them actually dies. So most of his children don't survive, even though he has a lot. But some of them did survive, and he has a grandson named Benjamin Harrison, who becomes the 23rd president. That will happen later. So one of his grandsons also
Mm-hmm.
becomes president. Um, And he resigns from the army in 1798. And President John Adams makes him Secretary of the Northwest Territory. So, do you have any idea what Northwest Territory was?
No.
So it was territory to the west of the Appalachian Mountains, of the original colonies that the English set up, and it's a big territory. And the states, it includes the area of Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, Ohio, Wisconsin, and part of Minnesota. So, but back then it was just the Northwest Territory, and as it gets settled, then they split it up and make it into these states. Okay, so there's a big territory. And basically, I believe he was in charge of it. So in 1799, Harrison becomes the Northwest Territory's first congressional delegate. So it's not a state yet, it's just a territory that's part of the United States, but it's not a state. It doesn't meet the requirements. So, but they still get to send somebody to Congress to I guess, represent the area or just sit there and as an observer. And that's what he's doing at this time. And then in the year 1800, right on the dot, he becomes the governor of the Indiana Territory after Congress establishes it. So originally it's the Northwest Territory. And after they take it from these Native Americans, then they start dividing it down into smaller pieces, and that's where those states eventually come from. And while he's the governor of the Indiana Territory, he signs treaties with different groups of natives, different tribes, and then he enforces those treaties using the army. And he calls in the army in order to remove or deal with any of the tribes that disagree with the treaties, like anybody that objects and tries to put up a fight, basically. So in 1811, Harrison fights the Battle of Tippecanoe against the forces of Tecumseh. Have you heard of Tecumseh before?
No.
He was a Native American chief from a tribe of people called the Shawnee. And basically, he doesn't want any white people to move into his territory. He's trying to keep it for his people. So he forms a big alliance to kind of resist the United States and keep people from moving there. And that's where he gets into a fight with William Henry Harrison. So then during the War of 1812, Harrison rejoins the army and is made Brigadier General of the Army of the Northwest. And yeah, so in other words, when he was fighting the Battle of Tippecanoe, he was not actually officially in the army, but he was leading it. And that's actually what caused people to consider him a war hero. And then in 1812, he rejoins the army. And have you heard of the War of 1812 before? No?
Yeah, I don't remember.
That's the second war that we had with England. That's the war that they burned the White House. They took Washington, D.C. and burned the White House down. So that's what. And in 1813, he defeats a force of English and Native Americans working together because most of the natives were siding with the English during this war. So he defeats them at the Battle of Thames, which is near Canada, or the area that will later become Canada. And Tecumseh is killed in this battle, and his confederacy is pretty much crippled so that they never become a threat again. And in 1814, Harrison resigns from the army again, and he moves with his family to a farm in North Bend, Ohio. And let's see, in 1819, he becomes a state senator. And for 3 years, he serves as a senator, and then he resigns. So that's from 1825 to 1828.
Okay.
And then in 1836, he decides to run for president for the Whig Party. And the Whigs is a political party which no longer exists today, but they were around back then. And he loses the election partly because the Whigs decide to run three guys. So obviously that messes up their vote total. They're not able to get a majority. And the guy that he loses to is Martin Van Buren, who is a Democrat. And Van Buren was the vice president of Andrew Jackson. So it's his turn to be president now, basically. So Martin Van Buren is president for one term. And then in the next election, the election of 1840, William Henry Harrison tries again. And he runs as a Whig, the Whig candidate. And at this time, he's 67 years old. So he's the oldest guy to ever run for president in U.S. history at the time. Yeah, I mean, 67. And the Democrats, they try to make a big deal out of his age. And so he chooses a guy named John Tyler as his running mate to run as the vice president. And John Tyler, he used to be a Democrat, but he had some issues with them. They offended him. And so he switched over to the Whig Party. And one of the reasons why they want to bring him in is because most of the Southerners back then would vote for the Democrat Party. That was pretty much the party of the South. Mm-hmm. And so, of course, today it's not, but back then it was. So they brought this guy in order to try and tap into that vote. And what happens is the Democrats, they decide to make an issue out of how old this guy is. So there's a newspaper that's released, and what they say in the newspaper is give him a barrel of hard cider and a pension of $2,000 a year, and he will sit the remainder of his days in his log cabin. So this guy was living in a log cabin house out in Ohio with his family on a farm. And so what happened, though, is the Whigs, they basically used this to their advantage. And they try and paint the Democrats and this Van Buren guy as rich elitists. And they say that William Henry Harrison is a man of the people, and he drinks hard cider, and he lives in a log cabin. And so what they do is for this campaign, they basically meme this guy into office. Like they don't really deal with issues that much, the political issues and the policies, and they focus more on imagery and slogans. So they use log cabins and hard cider in a lot of the campaign posters, and they even make a song about it, which I'll put a link to in the description. And his campaign is actually the first U.S. presidential campaign where they use slogans and songs. And what they do is they have huge political rallies, huge campaign rallies where lots of people show up, and they hand out bottles of whiskey that are shaped like log cabins. So the bottle looks like a log cabin. And I did find some pictures of this. Some of these things are still around. Some people still have them. They're probably worth a lot of money now. But the whiskey that they're giving away is provided by EC Booze Distillery. And this is where the term booze comes from. It's actually named after this distillery. So you may have noticed that a lot of people, they say booze just to mean hard alcohol, like strong alcohol and such.
Yeah.
So that started with this EC Booze Distillery, came to be synonymous with alcohol. And then, he actually he shows up in person at some of his campaign rallies, which was back then it was the first time that anybody had done that. Like the candidates weren't supposed to show up at the campaigns, or I mean, there was no law against it, but that was the custom. So this guy, he changed that custom. And then there's a nickname that he got from fighting with Native Americans in the Northwest Territory. People started calling him Tippecanoe because of the first battle that he won against Tecumseh. So they have a campaign slogan that's Tippecanoe and Tyler too, and they make a song about it. So like Obama, he wasn't the first candidate to come up with his own theme song. This guy actually had the first theme song. And I found one of his songs I've got here, just a rhyme. It says, should good old cider be despised and never regarded more? Should plain log cabins be should plain log cabins be despised? Our fathers built of yore. So, his supporters, they would. Here's another thing that was new: is his supporters would travel to different towns, and they would roll this 10-foot tall ball that they made through the streets. They would pull this thing through the streets, and on the side of the ball, they would write political slogans. And they would also have a band marching with this ball, or at least that's how it looks in the images that I saw from the newspapers of this. So basically, there's no internet, there's no electricity, there's no computers, but these guys are still getting everybody's attention with images and sound, and they're relying on word of mouth and in order to spread the message of this guy. And some of the phrases that they would have on the side of the ball, let's see. Farewell, dear Van, not the man, referring to a Martin Van Buren, his opponent, and to guide the ship, old Tip. So this is where the phrase "keep the ball rolling" comes from. Is this guy's campaign where they rolled these big balls through the street. So as the ball is rolling, the messages are coming up. So maybe you hear the music and you come out of you say, oh, what's that? You come out of your house and then there's this band and there's these guys rolling this big, huge ball. So you would see the messages. And it would stick with you because nobody had ever done anything like that before. So he wins the election of 1840 without hardly even talking about the issues that are at play, just imagery, free alcohol, songs, all this kind of stuff. And he is the oldest president ever to be elected, and he kept the record for being the oldest president up until the election of Ronald Reagan. And he is the first president to ride a train to Washington, D.C. So he was the first president to go there by train. And that's probably because trains were still fairly new technology. And he's inaugurated on March 4th, 1841, which is and of course, Washington, D.C. is further north of us considerably. So it actually does get cold there during the winter. And he decides, though it's cold, but he decides to go to his inauguration without wearing a gloves or a hat or an overcoat. He's just wearing like his regular clothes. And he rides a white horse to the site where he's going to give his speech. And he gives a speech that's almost 2 hours long. And it's the longest inaugural speech in history. So far, no president has given a longer speech. And while he's giving his speech, it's actually raining, and I believe it's actually below freezing, or if not below freezing, it's near freezing. So this guy gets all sorts of cold water on him. And what he said is, in his speech, he actually did talk about some politics and some substantial stuff. And one of the things he said is that he's going to leave financial matters to Congress, and he's not going to use the veto as much. So Andrew Jackson, who I did another video about, was the first Democrat president. And he used the veto a lot. And before he was president, most presidents would just sign most of what Congress put onto their desk. They just saw themselves as administrators. But Andrew Jackson, he used the veto to kind of push forward his own agenda. If they put something on his desk he didn't like, he just canceled it. So this guy is saying he's not going to use the veto as much. And he's going to let Congress decide how the money is spent, and he's only going to serve one term. And I actually did find a transcript of his speech. I'm not getting ready to read the whole thing, but I do have part of it here. So I was going to read this one part, and then I'll link to the whole speech in the description below in case anybody wants to read it. But here's part of it. He says, but with these broad admissions, if we would compare the sovereignty acknowledged to exist in the mass of our people with the power claimed by other sovereignties, even by those which have been considered most purely democratic, we shall find a most essential difference. All others lay claim to power limited only by their own will. The majority of our citizens, on the contrary, possess a sovereignty with an amount of power precisely equal to that which has been granted to them by the parties of the National Compact, and nothing beyond. We admit of no government by divine right, believing that so far as power is concerned, the beneficent Creator has made no distinction amongst men, that all are upon an equality, and that the only legitimate right to govern is an express grant of power from the governed. The Constitution of the United States is the instrument containing this grant of power to the several departments composing the government. So what ends up happening is he catches a cold making his speech, and eventually the cold gets worse and it becomes pneumonia, and he dies after just being there for 1 month. And his wife doesn't even get to the White House by the time that he's dead. He dies before she can even make it there. But what they do is they actually give her a pension. For her husband, she gets the wages that he would have gotten while he was president. And his vice president, Tyler, becomes the president, and he's the first vice president to ever become president. Like it sets the precedent for vice president taking over when the president dies, because other presidents later on will die in office, and from then on the vice president just takes over. So that's all I got on this. Do you have any questions or comments?
Yeah, I think it's very interesting.
Alrighty then. So I guess that's the end of it.